Different doesn't mean deficient, but our systems often treat it that way. In this episode, I unpack why we over-index on process, presence, and personality instead of outcomes, and how neurodiversity-informed leadership challenges the idea that there's only one right way to work. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Think Differently. Recently, I had a conversation with a leader who oversees thousands of employees and is looking to improve how they support them and their clients where they are. And in that conversation, she said something that really stayed with me. She said, we're constantly trying to figure out better ways of working together. And I remember thinking, of course, and then having that pause and that moment of, that's it. That's the real question that most leaders are really trying to solve for. Not diversity, not compliance, not policy. Just how do we work better together when people have different needs and ways of working? Because the more I sit in these conversations year over year, the more I realize something. We say we value difference. We say we want innovation. And we say we want diverse perspectives. But underneath all of that, there's often this quiet expectation that everyone will still do things the same way. So we're often looking for diversity and representation, but we're not always showing diversity in approach or thinking. We're seeing the same communication styles selected and rewarded, people working at the same speed, showing the same sort of presence, and organizing their work in the same way. And when somebody doesn't, we don't usually say, oh, that's a different way of working. That could be a strength. We should leverage that. We usually look at that person and say, oh, that's different. That's not how we work here. Maybe that's a problem. And I think that's where we're all continuously getting stuck. Because different shouldn't mean deficient. However, we're just so quick to point out when people work differently than when we do, when their approach is new, unfamiliar, or not what we've seen before. And we just assume our way is better because we know that to be successful, you have to work like me, like the rest of us. But I challenge that. Do we? In reality, the person or their approach, does it really have to match the current system? Are they really wrong, or is it just different? And one of the things that comes up so often in my work, especially when we start talking about neurodiversity, is how quickly difference gets translated into deficit. Now, we know autism isn't ADHD and ADHD isn't PTSD. You've heard me say that before. But it's also good to remember that just like heart conditions aren't interchangeable, if I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, I'm not treating high blood pressure the same way I treat someone who needs a valve replacement, but it's still a heart. But the treatments aren't identical. And so we think about that and we're like, yeah, so we have to have variance. People have different needs. But here's the interesting part, and this is where neurodiversity really steps up. Because what we have found is the leadership practices that actually support people with neurodivergence and neurotypical people, where they really thrive and succeed, are often the same. Clarity, structure, following up after meetings, clear deliverables and timelines, actually listening instead of reacting, meeting people where they are, providing support where they can be successful. That's not needing variance in approach. That's finding consistency across all. And when I say that, I have these sessions where I teach them neuro-inclusive ways that go across the entire group. They'll literally say to me, but how do I know they really have ADHD? They really say that after everything I teach them. And I just always have to pause because after I just gave that list, what in that list sounds like a neurodivergent accommodation rather than just really solid and good management practices? I often think, did you not hear anything I just said? And we know these things help regardless of diagnosis. But that question of, but how do I know they really have a problem really tells me something. It tells me that we're still thinking in terms of deficits and diagnosis before we're willing to change to increase access in our systems. But if we would just instead focus on more inclusive design, everybody benefits and we can change the conversation from deficit to more strong structure, right? If you have better meetings with clear agendas and minutes, everyone benefits. If you clarify expectations and have clear deadlines and performance goals, everyone benefits. Follow along if you create psychological safety so people can talk openly and get the support when they need it, you guessed it, everyone benefits. So when we are always waiting for someone to disclose something before we're willing to improve the process, it isn't a problem with the person. It's the problem with the system, the mindset. And if we really believe that different doesn't necessarily mean deficit, then it just might mean that your way of thinking and your willingness to work differently is a little bit narrow right now. The other thing that I see is how we over-index on the how things are done instead of the outcome. Instead of saying this is what needs to be done in terms of outcomes, we focus on how it was done. Did you follow the specific process? Did you sit in the office? Did you answer the expected tone? Did you phrase things the way we do in this corporation? Did you present the materials in my style? And I keep coming back to this idea. And this isn't to say we shouldn't have processes for safety or consistency or compliance, because those things are important, but we really need to ask, is it really about how the work gets done, or is it about whether it works? If employees are safe, payroll is processed, clients are cared for, why are we so attached to one very specific method? Is it possible that there could be more than one path to success? Could we document that into process? And are we so attached to our recipe that we forget the intended outcome? Guaranteed tonight, you and I are probably going to cook 2 completely different meals for our families, but they're all going to get fed. Because that's actually the outcome, full bellies, not necessarily the recipe we use to get there. And this is where neurodiversity and the broader concept of how and why we work really challenges leadership. Once you honestly accept that cognitive styles vary, that someone might process information differently, communicate differently, need quiet instead of stimulation, or stimulation instead of quiet, then you're forced to confront something uncomfortable. And that's the truth that there isn't one correct way to work. Are there standards? Yes. Are there desired outcomes? Of course. But is there one personality profile that defines excellence? I think we all know that answer is no. And then when we think about all of this, I keep coming back to the concept of teams and teaming because we talk about teamwork constantly. Whenever I have this conversation about difference, they're like, yeah, but I can't have an individual who doesn't check all the boxes. But I thought you were a team. Every organization espouses it. But in practice, what I see is if you pass the ball at work, if you say, hey, boss, I need help, you're often seen as weaker than the person who takes the ball and makes the goal. And that's what happens in corporate America, which means you're not actually acting like a team. But if we look at a real soccer team or football team, knowing when to pass the ball from a coach's perspective is just as important as the person who kicks the scoring goal, because the coach recognizes the value of what it takes for the team to meet the objectives. And so we're often talking about teamwork conceptually, right? And we see it actualized in sports teams and music groups. But I honestly rarely see teamwork truly harnessed in the workplace the way it's meant to be. And I doubled down on this because when we think about neurodiversity, it's always looked at as an individual problem with deficits that need to be overcome. But isn't that individual going to be part of a larger team? And is it not possible that that individual brings strengths that the team is lacking? And in turn, the team has strengths that maybe they don't? And so when you think about that, this is where this integration is so important, because we can't isolate the individual and say this person is a problem if we are going to actually talk about the importance of teamwork in our organizations. Which is it? And if you look at job requisitions, I'm finding that you're often trying to hire the exact same skill sets for everybody on the team. But in reality, if you were building a team, you would never want to hire 5 of the exact same players. Even if it's LeBron James, you don't need 5 of him. You still need guards and defenders. You need complementary strengths that create this whole. But yet we go back into corporations and education, and all the descriptions are starting to look the same. We all want strong communicators. We all want executive presence. We want high energy, which means extroverts. We want strategic, but detail orientation, collaborative, but independent. That's not hiring for skill sets. That's hiring for a unicorn individual. And you want all those individuals to be the same. Now, is it possible that we've identified a few people who work that way? And because they were so successful, that became our recipe for success? Maybe. But then how often do we wonder why the team feels flat, why we're lacking creativity, why we don't have more innovation, why we're strong in some areas but have gaping holes in others? It might be because you're hiring for a very narrow recipe. And if we could get out of our own ways to understand that different doesn't mean deficient, it might mean you finally have someone who can see things the rest of you don't. And I do want to tread carefully here because this shows up in more sensitive conversations too. Sometimes we talk about return to office policies, which seem to be the current trend. And I see a lot of energy around reasonable accommodations because flexibility matters. It absolutely does. But I also get cautious when difference starts being used as justification for separation. I did not spend decades trying to find pathways to inclusive environments for neurodivergent individuals just to support a narrative that says I'm different and I don't belong here, because that's what some of you are saying. We want and need to be careful that different doesn't become deficient in disguise, because inclusion is about access, not isolation. If someone needs a quiet space, let's talk about quiet spaces. If someone needs written follow-up, then let's provide written follow-up. If someone needs flexibility during treatment or flare-up, then let's build on that and give them that accommodation. But we have to be careful not to weaponize difference in ways that ultimately reinforces exclusion. Being different should never mean you should be excluded from the room. It might mean that the room needs to flex and things need to change, but you belong here too. And that may be the deepest piece underneath all of this, is the concept of, can a different individual be productive? We know that answer. But when we're using sameness and presence as proxies for performance, it creates a harmful narrative. If I can't see you, I don't know if you're working. If I can't see you, I'm anxious. If you present and communicate the way I would, then you're probably going to be successful. If you say something differently or not how I would say it, I'm going to get anxious and scared. That's not performance metrics. That's control. And so we're confusing visibility with value, familiarity with competence, and comfort with capability. When somebody works differently, instead of asking the question like we should, was the outcome strong? Even if I wouldn't have done it that way, we ask, why aren't you doing it like me? Why aren't you doing it the way we do it here? That's not leadership. That's insecurity. So maybe the shift is this. What if we stop micromanaging the how and allow a little more variability because we're better able to clarify the what? What does excellence look like here? What does safety look like? What does quality look like? What does service look like? Those are outcomes, by the way. And then when we know what those outcomes look like, we can ask how many different paths could exist that allow us to get there successfully. Because when we widen the path, something wonderful changes. We get more ideas, we get more creativity, we get more innovation, we get more diversity. We also don't have to make as many accommodations. People don't have to disclose as much. You don't have to make these one-off changes. Individuals don't have to fight as hard against a system that doesn't seem to support them. People don't have to mask or pretend to be someone they're not. And we don't have to contort ourselves into other templates to strive for success, which actually ends up leading to anxiety and burnout. Because what we really know is this: there is more than one way to be excellent. And maybe if leadership is less about making everyone the same to be successful and more about building something strong enough to hold those differences and really bring the best out in everyone, we might actually be able to appreciate that beauty in that variance and achieve the goals we're all striving for. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank AudioWorks Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.